Hi, today I'd like to show you how to use Azure Web App. And Azure Web App is a PaaS service which your cloud provider, in this case Azure, provides you so you can just solely focus on PaaS solution. So you don't need to focus on infrastructure, you can just create a web application in several languages. You can use Java, .NET, Node.js, Python, and deploy it on a serverless architecture. Uh, Underwater, of course, there's a server running it, but you don't need to worry about scaling, upsizing, security measures, and it provides you all kinds of features. So today I'd like to show you how to create a web application on Azure using a Java technology. For this, we go to my Git repository and we go to the standard web app and we copy the content of the create.sh script. As you can see, let me here. I'm creating a web application using the Maven archetype web app. It just creates a web application with a Maven file, with a POM file, and it creates a Hello World web application. At the end, you will have a WAR file, and you can deploy this WAR file on a servlet container like Tomcat. So let's get started. I'm going to my shell. I'm now in some kind of temp folder, doesn't matter where, and I'm creating the create.sh file. I can also, of course, not create the file, just copy the command, and I'm creating a web application. At the end, you will see it created a standard web app folder, and the next thing I like to do now is link this to my Visual Studio project. So in order to do that, I need to have in Visual Studio I need to have a project, and here I will create a new project. Say new project, and I will say Azure Web App number 1, and let's call it Azure Standard Web App because I'm going to show you some other demos as well. We're choosing here the Git repository as version control mechanism. So that's one of the great things which you have within Visual Studio, is that you can create your own private repositories, basically for free, because they're part of your project. Later on we will also use a build, an automatic build, so we have a CI/CD completely which links your code repository to the deployment on Azure. And one last thing I would just like to mention, you can have also log work here, where you can assign tasks and issues to the developers of your, or the members within your project. So as you can see here, we created an empty project with no code at the moment. We're going to clone or copy the Git repository. So now we're going to link our local sources with the Git repository. I start with creating a Git edition. Then I do git add all the files. Git commit -m initial commit. And what I need to do now is, this is the magic, git remote add origin. So I'm linking this source code to the remote repository, and then I need to do, let me think, git push set upstream. Here we go. So now when I look at the code folder, you see that all the code is checked in just now. So that's a good thing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to Eclipse, and within Eclipse you need to have 2 plugins installed. You do this by going to the Eclipse Marketplace, and the first one you need to have is the VSTS plugin. You see here I got the Theme Explorer everywhere. It's already installed. This makes it possible to check my code into VSTS from within my Eclipse workspace. The other plugin I need to have is the Azure plugin. Here you see I have the Azure Toolkit for Eclipse, version 3.04. By the way, I'm using Eclipse, the Neon version, which is based on JDK 1.8. Cancel. We're going to import an existing Maven project. Then we navigate to the folder we just created, which is the temp folder, standard web app, and here I'm creating my application. Let's see. Here it is. So what I like to do now is deploy this standard web app to my Azure environment using the Azure plugin. So I'm just selecting, right-clicking the project, and I say Azure, and I'm going to deploy it as a Azure Web App. As you can see here, I also have the possibility to deploy this as a Docker container. Then it will actually run as a Docker image within Azure Web Apps. But for now, we're just going to deploy it as an Azure Web App. Here I can create a web application, and I will give this web application the same name as I have given my project in VSTS. So here I'll just say Azure Standard Web App 1. I'm using Tomcat 7.0 as the servlet container, and I'm going to create a new service plan. I will go into depth later on what the service plan is, and I'm selecting Western Europe as my location. I'm also creating a new resource group with the same name, almost the same name as my web application. So let's go to the Azure portal, and if correct, I should see here the Azure Standard Web App resource group, and it's created a service plan, and in a while you will also see a web application here as well. So it's still busy creating it. Maybe in the meantime we can go to the app service plan, and the app service plan makes it possible to assign alerts, scale your web app up and down, or link it to certain networks. Let's close this, refresh. Here we see that we also have a web application at the moment. And one of the cool things, I will show you also how to use this, is that you can make the uses of slots. And a slot is a mechanism where you can run pre-production on. I will show you how that can be very useful for you in a production environment later on. So let's see where we are now. It created the web application. I'm not deploying the application at the moment. I just first like to show you what we have here. So I'm going to open this on a new tab. So we create now an empty web application. And every time you create a web application, you also have debugging facilities with it as well. You can access those debugging or tooling facilities by entering SCM between your domain and your web application name. It's still busy deploying. As you can see, it needs to authorize. and it sees that I also already have an authenticated session, so I'm able to access the tooling. So let's have a look. CMD. It's still busy. So here you got the site folder, the www root, and you see at the moment there is nothing deployed here yet. So let's deploy the web application with Eclipse, pushing the deploy button. So it's finished the deployment. Let's just refresh here what happened. You see it created a standard webapp.war. So this will also be the name of the context root. We can just click it here and say open the link, and here you see it's pointing to the Azure Standard Web App folder, and the context root is Standard Web App. You can manipulate it with several tricks, but for now this is just fine. So what we have done now is very easily create a Hello World app, make the link into the Git repository, and we created and we deployed this application on a Azure Web App using the Visual Studio plugin. So what we like to do now is create an automated build, and the next time we check something in, we like to deploy it on a deployment slot. So what we're going to do is we're going to Visual Studio Team Services, and we're going to the Build and Releases. And there we are creating a new definition. And one of the cool things here is that you see we have a template for Azure Web App for Java. Let's apply this template, and here you see all the steps that are needed for you to deploy an Azure Web application or a Java web application as a Azure Web App. First, we are creating the WAR file here. We're not using any end stuff, so we can remove this. We've chosen for Maven, so the Gradle step can be removed as well. Then it copies some stuff, publishes an artifact. Now I like to actually not work directly on production, but I like to use a deployment slot. And in order to do that, I need to create one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to the Azure portal, and there on the Azure Web App, I'm going to the, let me see, deployment slots. And there you see the message, you need to have it standard or premium plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upgrade my plan. Scale up. And actually I'm now going to pay for this feature, but I really like to show you this feature. I'm choosing one of the cheapest. Let me just go for standard. Select. So I've upgraded my service plan, and one of the extra features I can use now is make use of the deployment slots. So I'm creating a slot, and I'm calling this slot pre-production slots. And I say I like to copy the configuration of the original one. I say OK. It's done. Okay, let's go to deployment slot. You see here I have a deployment slot. It's already running. So basically what it does, if you go to my Hello World app, it created a second one. New tablet. And let me go here. And the second one has the same name, only it's called pre-production slot. So I can just say here add pre-production slot, and here you should be able to see the deployment on the pre-production slots. Let me just double check if I have used the correct one. Nope, I made a mistake here. Let's just copy it here. Probably made a typo somewhere. Slash standard. That's correct. I didn't deploy anything here yet. So we will do that with the automatic build. So back to our VSTS build. Let's create the subscription I'm using. Authorize. And this will. Hey! So here I'm selecting the standard Java Web App. Is this the correct one? Let me double check. Azure Standard Web App. Yeah, that's the one. Azure Standard Web App. And here I'm specifying a slot. And this is the slot I'm using. It's the pre-production slot. That's correct. Then I'm actually going to deploy the stuff. Yep, deploy to slots. Azure Standard Web App. Pre-production slots. That's all okay. And then I actually like to start the web application. Let's go here. So that's all done. Let's just save it for now, leaving the default settings. The next thing I want to do is I like to link this to a trigger that listens to the repository. So here I just say in triggers I enable the continuous integration, and I say okay, once something has been checked into the master branch, then I like this build to be triggered. And I just say save, and I say initial build, created, save. So now I'm going back to the builds, and this is the build we just created, and you see nothing has been built yet. The proof is in eating the pudding, that's what people say. So let's go to the web application and go to index, and so this is a version 1.0. Magnificent. I'm saving it. I just say team. I linked this with the Visual Studio repository with the steps I showed you earlier. I'm saying stage this one, and I say version 1.0, and I'm committing and pushing it to the master branch. I will say my username. Oh, made a typo. Finish. There we go. Okay. So you see a build has been triggered now. Let's see what it's doing. So I didn't create my own build agent, so it's using one of the hosted agents, which is provided by Visual Studio Team Services itself. So once a build agent is available for us, we can see what it's doing. So let me pause this for a while, because I don't know how long it will take. So stuff is going on now. It's initializing the agent, the job. It's getting the sources out of Git. It's creating the war file by executing a Maven package. You see it's downloading all the required dependencies. Then it's stopping the web application deployment slot. Now it's deploying the application to that slot. So. And after that it will start the deployment slot. So that has been done. Let us check what has been created here. On production we still have our old deployments, and here, let me see, one moment please. So what I did here is I forgot to start the deployment slot on the pre-production, so it's being rebuilt, and now if we see on the pre-production slot we have this new version with Hello World. This is version 1.0, magnificent, and on the production side we still have our Hello World. Now, ideally, in an automated world, you would have a test, and you would read this test if your web application is still working. By the way, you can define your tests in Visual Studio Team Services as well, so that's great stuff. But anyway, you have now two versions running, one in production, which is still the old version, and you got the new version, which has been automatically built and created on the pre-production slot. So let's say we're happy with this version and we like to have this in production. So what you can do now is you go to the Web App, you go to deployment slots, and there you say I like to swap, and I say I just like to swap, and I say I like to swap from the pre-production slot, and I like to make this production, and I say OK. So it's more or less like a blue-green deployment. So let's see here. Swapping web slots shouldn't take too long. Let's just wait a while. So it's taking a while, longer than I would expect. Don't know why, but let's just be patient. It's done. So now let's go to the production, refresh it, and you will see here, you see Hello World, this is version 1.0, which used to be on the pre-production. And here, when we reload the pre-production site, you should be able to see the old production version. hello world. So this was the end of the demo. I showed you guys how to create a simple Java web application and link this to Visual Studio Team Services in the Git repository. I showed you how to deploy it as a Azure Web App using the standard plugin. There we also created our first Java web application, Azure App Service, and we used the Tomcat as a container. And the last step is that we created an automated build based on a check-in trigger. So I hope you guys liked it, and this is the end. Have a nice evening.